Mexico GP weekend has been quite eventful so far, from rookie drivers to now upgrades on the car and quite significant ones that at it. We've already seen the beautiful bodywork that Ferrari has displayed for us, but McLaren has brought a floor upgrade that we can go over, all the rear wings and downforce that every team is running, and the spec of car that's running in this Mexico GP. With this high altitude, the air is super thin, so engine cooling is very hard to come by, and you need extra cooling gills on the car, or potentially having a bigger engine cover as well, which was brought to other teams. We'll go over that as well. Wanted to thank you guys for the support as usual. Amazing community, and I'm happy to call it mine. If you're new here, go ahead and subscribe. It'd mean the world to me. But let's get started with the rear wings here in Mexico. I did cover the Ferrari and McLaren, but we have a better picture of the Ferrari that I just wanted to go over. It's that exact Monaco spec of wing, high upper flap, big lower flap for the actual extra downforce you can gain here in Mexico. Still a very slippery track regardless of how big the wing is, but you want to bolt on it as much downforce points as you can, so we're going to see the big bulky stuff here. We get a little bit of a blurry look, but a nice look at it as well for the Red Bull car. Monaco style of wing yet again. Every wing has its nuances, at least when it comes to car characteristics. The Ferrari has a bigger lower plane to most other cars. That's at least how the airflow is being distributed over the car and how it's hitting that rear wing. The Red Bull has always had a very small lower plane, but a big bulky upper plane, typically for the DRS effectiveness and just how the flow goes over the car. McLaren usually distributes it pretty evenly. I do not think this is their highest downforce wing. It's one of the only cars so far to not have the highest downforce. It's very hard to tell still with these pictures, but to me this still looks like a very medium high downforce rear wing, as it does have a big upper plane, but it's not as bulky as the others, and the lower plane doesn't have as big of a dip in that spoon section like it usually does for its Monaco style wing. We then get this angle of the Williams car, who has no cooling, at least in this picture. I have seen some pics of it with a little bit of cooling gills on the side. Typically they've been resistant to it, and I guess they're pretty confident on that Mercedes engine. Typically doesn't need as much cooling, but the wing itself, Monaco style, very bulky, very big. The lower plane is smaller than the upper plane, similar to that of the Red Bull. We then get a nice shot of the Aston Martin rear wing, similar to the Ferrari actually when you look at the lower plane, at least those lines in the plane. And as you can see, the top is also big for a big DRS effectiveness. We also have a nice picture of that of the Sauber, who could potentially actually have a decent car here. Bottas has always ran very well here, so that's another sign to go off of. But the car itself is heavily updated from Coda and so on. Wing very bulky and very big. It's not been used very often from Sauber, as the car is super draggy anyways. Sometimes in Mexico, drag isn't that important, so it could be a decent track for Sauber. But then let's go over the upgrades for the cars. There's actually a decent amount to cover, which I'm happy to cover. Quickly looking at what isn't an upgrade but something that they're going to be testing, Aston Martin has two different styles of side pods. The previous version of it and the newer version, they're probably going to go for a Frankenstein car. They're going to mess around with the floor and just overall that setup in the car to see what works here in Mexico. It's been a very up and down season, more down for Aston Martin, but Fernando Alonso is the only driver outside of those top four teams to get a top 5 in any of the GPs, and it was in Saudi, so it comes to show you how good Fernando is. As I stated for the Red Bull, it's a new engine cover. It's very hard to tell. They've kind of just further pushed out the engine cover in the middle so that the back of the car where you see that outlet of the engine cover is bigger, and they can have more engine cooling coming out from the outside. They are using as much cooling gills as possible. They've always been pretty toned down on it. The Honda engine performs very well here in Mexico. It's always been a strong trait to this car. Williams does also have a beam wing and an engine cover here that is specific to this track. They're not necessarily upgrades, but updates as they brought to the car. Circuit specific. We've seen this beam wing be ran before, but back again here in Mexico. This could possibly also be a big track for them as well. Now RB does have some circuit specific stuff and floor fences and floor edge. We have no pictures of this yet. It is all underbody work, but the RB car did work pretty well in Coda. They've always worked well in Mexico. They do have the Honda engine that helps them out a lot in this altitude, because for some reason that engine works much better than the Mercedes and the Ferrari. So expect a big performance if they can get into that nice window. Mexico's a great track for testing stuff. And looking at teams that are testing, Ferrari, Aston Martin, a lot of teams are running those rakes on the car to see how the airflow is going to go over, as it is a very flat track and it tells you a very good amount of the distribution of air. Aston Martin actually used it in 2023 to figure out how the car was flowing. Then in Brazil, they had a great GP. Maybe they figured it out. It's very hard to tell with that team whether they're going to be good or not. Typically, they disappoint us though. There is also a picture of the Red Bull diffuser, and now some people are stating this is new to Mexico. Nothing is documented, at least from what you've seen in those documents. I think this is just the updated version from Coda. It is nice to see, and you can see how they've changed the profiling towards the top part of the car. We've already seen that change that they've done to the diffuser back in Baku, but the profiling on the top has been changed for the flow to be a bit more wider distributed than they had before. A little more similar to that of the Ferrari. They have a pretty wide distribution on the top profiling of that diffuser. And lastly, the biggest upgrades coming here to Mexico is that of the McLaren, and it is in the floor fencing. When you look at the top part of the car, which are the nicest pictures of it, the floor, this has been ran on this car consistently. Nothing has changed. It's a beautiful picture of it that at it, but they've always ran this kind of double splitter in the front, splitting the air in outwash, and then what's going from the beginning part of the floor to the rear part of it. That inwash on the floor that's going towards the rear part of the car, it's always been similar. The floor edge is the exact same from Miami as well, but the floor fencing is different. And we've seen teams change this part of the car consistently, and it's always in that first step in those Venturi tunnels. As you can see, it's a bigger cutout. It's something similar to that of the Williams of 2023, funny enough. That's where I can kind of find those comparisons. Before, they had it a bit lower down, and it's different from team to team. Like an Aston Martin car is running that as pretty much like a wall. Then they tried going back to the solution that's now similar to the McLaren. They right now have the biggest cutout, at least in that first step of the Venturi tunnel. And they've always been talking about this floor being a big risk, as a lot of teams have made a lot of mistakes in bringing this floor. So let's see if it's going to be a step up or a step down. This is just to help the distribution from the front of those Venturi tunnels getting to the back of the car. Specifically in that area, they want the flow to be distributed more towards the rear and sticking within that inner bodywork of the underfloor to get to the diffuser. So let's see if that's what it provides, or will it be unstable like most teams have it. I mean, McLaren's been pretty consistent with its upgrade, so... Oh my god. Damn spider. McLaren's been pretty consistent with its upgrade, so I do expect this to perform pretty well. This is all that we have here in Mexico. Still pretty big upgrades to be brought in Mexico. Typically a GP that doesn't have too much, but it's nice to see. Let's see if McLaren can step up. Love to hear your thoughts on the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe, it'd mean the world, and peace.